Global Indian Network. Print, TV, events, podcasts. Find out more at globalindianseries.com.
Welcome back to the Global Indian Podcast, home to the greatest conversations and the official platform for people of Indian origin. Yes, let's face it, we are everywhere. Now, you know, every single week we plunge into the human experience behind our perceptions of identity, take a second look at the countries we now call home, and tackle the big conversations. Well, this week I'm joined in our Global Indian studios by the remarkable Rashid Gatrad, OBE, DL, and many other titles that are longer than the English alphabet. He is an extraordinary human being who was brought to our attention by our very own ambassador in Malawi, Reverend Sakrani. Rashid runs us through his life and the incredible moments in which he decided to become a champion for social change. His own journey has started off a revolution in the way that we look at the oceans, and equally importantly, the way that we look at charity. What's even more fascinating is the journey of his own family, how they went to Malawi, and a promise made in the small villages of Gujarat that end up changing the dynasty of over 5 generations. It is one of those tales that you need to listen to. More will be revealed within this podcast, I assure you. As always, I'd like to say a massive thank you to all our dear supporters and sponsors, many of which you'll hear from soon. And if you too would like to be involved in our 50 Shades of Brand discussions, well, it couldn't be easier. Come to the website. It's www.globalindianseries.com. Before we kick off, over to you, Alex, with our weekly news.
Here are the headlines for the Global Indian Series on the 23rd of February 2022. An angry mob has stoned to death a mentally ill man in Pakistan, authorities had said. Dozens of people have been arrested following his brutal murder, which took place on Saturday evening in a remote village in Punjab province, after it was alleged that the victim had burned some pages of the Quran. More than 200 people of Indian origin occupy positions of leadership in as many as 15 countries, including the United States and the United Kingdom. So says India Diaspora, an American organization. Of these, 60 hold cabinet ranks. Sri Lanka is shipped out to Britain, the last of several hundred containers filled with thousands of tons of illegally imported waste. Several Asian countries have in recent years been knee-deep in rubbish from wealthier nations and have started turning back unwanted shipments. The waste in the UK arrived in Sri Lanka between 2017 and 2019 and was listed as used mattresses, carpets and rugs. However, in truth, it contained bio-waste from hospitals, including body parts from mortuaries, according to custom officials. And finally, 50 years after the UK forcibly deported them to make way for a US military base on the island of Diego Garcia, 5 Chagossians have visited the disputed archipelago with the help of Mauritius.
Hi, my name is Divya and I'm co-founder of the Global Indian Podcast. Before you get to today's show, I've got a quick favour to ask. If you've been enjoying our conversations, I'd love if you could take just 1 minute to leave us a review on the platform that you're listening to us on and share our work to friends and family. It helps us out a lot. Word of mouth is the primary way that we grow. Thanks for your continued support.
Hi, my name is Nestor Alfred, CEO of St. Lucia's Citizenship by Investment. Think freedom. What comes to mind? Freedom to explore, to travel to any destination for work or play. Or is it freedom of expression? Being surrounded by the globally minded, those who care for society and environment. Every year, people from around the world apply for St. Lucian citizenship because they realize that real freedom is based on choice. Discover more about St. Lucian citizenship and how it's helping global Indians achieve more.
My name is Chitra Stern, and I am a proud Global Indian Ambassador and CEO of Martignal Resorts and Martignal Residences. We pride ourselves on the journeys that define a community, and our developments bring people together. Did you know that over 70,000 people just like us call Portugal home? The Global Indian journey has brought people together in a meaningful way, and on behalf of all of us at Martignal, we want to thank you for joining us in these remarkable conversations. We look forward to seeing you here in Lisbon post-COVID. Have a great day.
and just move. Get up and just move. Get up and just move. Get up and just move.
Now you be part of the history books. Rashid, it's a pleasure to have you on the show for the Global Indian Podcast. I've been reading your book here, and for those, once we can get the video edition done, it's Moments in Time with a slightly younger version of you. I was saying off air, I think if you re-dyed your hair black, you'll be a spitting image.
50 years ago, that was.
Although there's only a few years in between. Rashid, it's a remarkable story, because your story for me is much deeper than just your own incredible accomplishments in your own life, but this incredible dynasty of almost a fusion between luck, giving back to society, and a fateful journey that takes your great-great-grandfather to Africa. But before I kick off, why don't you introduce yourself and tell us a bit about your own story of how your family became who they are?
Well, now I'm in the UK, and I'm a consultant pediatrician and professor of pediatrics. I went to school in Malawi, and at the age of 5, my dad said to the teacher that he met for the first time, and I met for the first time, and he said, "I want you to make my son a doctor." And that stuck with me. And when I was about 11, there were no schools in Malawi. So I had to sit for a scholarship. And there were a few hundred people that sat for this. And there were 4 of us that were chosen to go to Zimbabwe for our secondary education. And after the GCSEs weren't then, but there were O-levels, as you may remember. And completed the O-levels. It was days of apartheid at the time. We were not allowed to do A-levels, subjects such as science subjects. So I had to leave Zimbabwe and its apartheid policies to come here to the UK to complete my A-levels and then go on to University of Leeds. But even during my A-levels, I had one teacher telling me that, "Gatrad, you're never going to become a doctor, so don't do 3 A-levels, but just do 2. And that wasn't going to be because I wanted to be a doctor, because my mum said to me, "Don't come back to Malawi
Until you're a doctor, yeah.
In Aslam in those days, unless you're a doctor." So that was a huge threat, not to be able to see my mum again. So that spurred me on, and I got to uni. 1971, which is 50 plus years ago, I qualified, and then did my house jobs, which is what you do as a junior doctor. And really, I think a struggle started after I qualified, because there was a lot of discrimination. And the jobs that I was able to get were with difficulty. And not the best jobs in the best places. But I think when you have spurred on by wanting to be better than the next person, I think the Lord's with you as well. And my eventual goal was to be a consultant pediatrician. But a lot of people along the way were saying, well, Asian people who are not white don't become acute pediatricians. Hence, in a way, it was a blessing in disguise, because it took me 3 years longer to get to my destination. But during those 3 years, I was able to go into specialties which gave me extra knowledge and extra skills. So when I eventually did become a consultant, I really was very well experienced in a lot of what we call ologies, which is neurology and gastroenterology and cardiology. So, which actually gave me an edge on a lot of other people who had become consultants before me who were younger than me. So
Yeah.
that was the edge that I had, yeah.
Because your background is remarkable. You've done a number of degrees. You've got more letters behind your name than I think the English alphabet. And what's really fascinating is that you've actually dedicated a large chunk of that time in terms of supporting people. And in this era where we talk about identity politics, and we like to think on the platform that we're far more than the arbitrary factor of skin color. But in this era of identity politics, you've actually proven that where you're born has no impact upon the national identity in which you now put yourself on. Now, you are obviously the Queen's representative in the fantastic world of the Midlands. I do say that. I am slightly biased there. You're only down the road from my own parents. And you actually help people in terms of representing the Queen when they get their nationality. So what does this whole notion of Britishness mean to you? What does that represent in your life, knowing the struggles that you've been through and the impact that you've had on this country? Because a lot of your own papers, you've written over 80 papers, have actually reformulated how public policy is now being looked at in the UK. A lot of people won't even know a lot of the work that you've done has impacted modern day NHS, but also our health reforms in this country, all from the young lad that came from Malawi. So what is Britishness in your mind?
Well, I think importantly, I think British race as a nation is generally fairer. I say this in spite of the fact that I have a discrimination. I think people tend to discriminate within themselves anyway, Hindus versus Muslims, or Muslims versus Sikhs, or whatever. So discrimination is always there as an undertone. Doesn't matter who you are. But at the same time, I think we've got to look beyond that and look at humans as humans are. And from my charitable work, we've never looked at Muslims, Sikhs, or Hindus. So we've looked and worked across cultures and across religions because everybody is God's creation. And I think if you go with that notion, and if you actually win over people's hearts, you have to give before you take. And certainly in the British society, if you give before you take, you'll be accepted very much more easily. I think British society is fair. One of the things that one learns is about punctuality. So there's no such thing as Indian Greenwich Mean Time. It's got to be proper Greenwich Mean Time.
Yeah.
So I think that's one of the things that I've learned is that you've got to be very punctual. You've got to respond to people fairly smartly, and you keep your promises. I think this, to me, is how Britishness should be and is as I see it. Because I'm a British Asian who's from Malawi. That's my sort of, my identity, I suppose.
When you go back to this incredible dynasty of your own family and your own success, and we'll go into more detail, there's a story in your book that reaches out to me, and I suppose it speaks to every storyteller out there. It's how 5 generations deep, your whole legacy changes on that notion of giving before you take. Run us through this remarkable story of how a young father with a child the same age group knocks on a small door in Gujarat asking for help.
I think that story really, it resonates right through our generations. It's a question of stretching out your hand to those people who need help. And I think most of our family, because it's a family value of trying to help others, I think it's an inner need for most people. But I've been fortunate in that having a medical degree and certainly being a pediatric specialist, I've been able to use that qualification and other qualifications with it to be able to help not only people locally in terms of training and teaching and guiding them, but also people abroad doing the same thing, teaching, training and guiding them, but also using those skills in a positive sort of way by, in a broad sense, I suppose you could say, trying to deliver the United Nations sustainability goals, which are to do with poverty, education, access to water, gender identity, even life underwater, which is where my sort of environmental credentials come in, which is WASUP, World Against Single-Use Plastic, which I founded 4 or 5 years ago now.
Run the audience through the stories that have defined your family, that have kind of made you who you are, because the reason why I go back to that, and I can narrate it here. You're in Gujarat. This is many, many centuries ago from what it seems like, in the 1800s. And the door knocks, and you have a young man with his child, and they haven't eaten in days, and they're asking for support. And it's your family member that brings them in, feeds them, and they go off. But before they leave, they turn around and say, a castle will be built upon this place, and your child will travel the world. 16 years later, against the wishes of his own parents, your great-grandfather takes the voyage heading towards the international realms, and he heads towards the areas within India where the big ships are going off, but he didn't have any money. And so he gets a job with a rich merchant. A young middle-class lady allows him to come into the house to support him, feeds him, treats him as one of her own, and then lends him the equivalent of a large salary at the time to go on his voyages. Now, that one single act redefined a whole legacy of your generations, because you found yourself at that moment in time in present-day Malawi. And the story obviously goes on from there. But what does that story teach you in terms of your value system? How did that impact you growing up? And more so, how does it reshape the way in which you looked at charitable work?
My great-grandfather, particularly during the month of fasting, once he had set himself up, would not break his own fast until all the poor people had broken their fast. And he had this big, huge castle that he eventually built in Gujarat. And he had a smaller castle for those people who were traveling from A to B. So they could stop there, and then they could have food or keep their horses there, etc. And they were always looked after. And that legacy continued even in Malawi, where we had huge businesses. We had 56 branches from the north of Malawi, which used to be in Aslam, to the south. And I remember going with my dad to in our what we used to call box body, which is like a truck. And in those days there were wild animals as well. So they used to be our guards with rifles in case any animals attacked us, etc., or even humans attacked us. So Dad was very well off, but even then, I think the roots were not forgotten, because we had what we used to call cabins, which were really properly built houses, but we used to call them cabins, where anybody from anywhere that came along, a stranger, could stay with us and also have meals with us. And they became part of the family. It doesn't matter who it was or where they came from. This is in Malawi. Yeah. But my great-grandfather he was the first person ever, Asian person, to go to Malawi. He went there about 20 years after David Livingstone got there. So it's an incredible story in that the first Asian who brought other Asians to Malawi or Nyasaland. And a lot of the Hindu families that came, they came as our accountants, and their great-grandchildren are actually millionaires and billionaires around the world.
Because some of the largest accounting companies are still there. In Malawi, whether it's in Blantyre or Lilongwe, it's right. A remarkable story. And so you found yourself, obviously, fast forward to present day, you are a great face for Rotary around the world. You've done a lot of work on that side. Obviously, you're still operating, you're still working within the hospital nature, but without pay. And you're supporting the lives of countless children across the UK and worldwide. Why do you do what you do? What is it that you see in others that you feel other people can learn from?
I think the most important thing is simple word is I enjoy what I do. I genuinely enjoy what I do. I'm so pleased that at 75, I'm physically active, mentally active. I still am an avid reader in that I read every evening pediatric articles and updates. So it keeps me, I suppose, mentally active and young. And my hobby, I suppose, is the environment, which I think you might know, is World Against Single-Use Plastic. And I talk to schools at least twice a week on Zoom at the moment, virtually, on climate change. Last week, for example, I talked to a school about importance of forests. And the week before, we talked about greenhouse gases. And I think one thing that we as humans don't realize is that we are not masters of the planet, but that we could even be servants of the planet, because a planet that was pristine when it was given to us has now been exploited, particularly for energy, through overuse of our natural resources. And I think it's this importance and the fact that our future generations are in serious jeopardy from our actions that we need to do something to put things right. And this is a generational game. And I think by educating children to say, I think you should be aware of this, the fact that my generation, my previous generation, has created an environment in the world whereby, given another 80 years, 100 years, if we carry on the way we are, civilization as we know it won't actually exist. So I think it's really when my grandson was born 4 years ago that when I saw a television program called Blue Planet, I thought, what the hell's going to happen to him? And that's when my life changed in terms of doing a lot of environmental work and not only educating myself about it, but educating others.
Yeah.
And it's interesting to know, right? And that is that I came to know that if one person tells 3 people, and those 3 people tell another 3 people each, you'll be surprised to know that in 3 weeks, the entire world gets the message.
Yeah, absolutely. I suppose it comes down to the purest notion that we are custodians of the environment around us. If we're willing to be a participant, i.e. we often destroy, then we also have to have the obligation to also mend, to heal, to replant. And so therefore that is a blessing that we have in the human form. And is one thing that we often negate, isn't it? Because we like the content of things. We love the fact that we have the TVs. We love the fact that we have the convenience of going to the store in the car. But then we have to think, what impact does this have on the future generations? And what can we do at this moment in time that goes beyond the virtue signaling of going to demonstrations, but do it with our own lives, with our own hands, to say, how are we going to actively participate in a greater environment for all? You wrote a book that you kindly passed over to my daughter about single-use plastics, and you said you're speaking at schools and you're looking to make this more of a national curricular activity, that we don't just talk about climatic changes, but we act with the consciousness that climate change is taking place right now. What do you think are some of the biggest misconceptions you feel that we have as a society around some of the key issues that you've been talking about?
I think the biggest thing that I think affects me at the moment, there are 2 things really. One is global poverty, okay? And I think the only way to get out of poverty is through education, okay? And my mum didn't have any education at all. My mum actually came from a very, very, very poor family. And she never let us forget that. And that's why I think I have never forgotten that people are poor, they need help. But in order to get them out of poverty, we have to give them education. But the problem we've got now around the world is that climate change is causing a huge problem and is going to create more divisions. Within, there'll be less equality that climate change is causing. And it's creating more and more poverty. You see, places like Madagascar, places like Kenya, for example, we've got migrants, we've got plastic migrants, and it is purely and simply as a result of social and climate injustice. You see, we are creating all these gases and industrialization, yet the people that are suffering are actually people who are totally innocent in this, the children of the world and also the innocent nations. So I think my concern basically is that poverty is hitting us and it's going to get worse. Education is something everybody needs, but you have to get the conditions right for people to get educated. What do I mean by that? It's not a question of just giving them money to be educated, but I think if you can change their lives, for example, get them to school. For example, girls don't go to school because they got no sanitary pads, for example. So provision of sanitary pads is important. By education of girls, I mean giving them skills, such as sewing skills, which we have got in Patna, in Malawi, and in Pakistan. So if you can give them skills and educate the women, chances are they will educate the children much more. And that, I think, is crucial in all this. So education is so important. Because the other issue is to get a child out of its, shall we say, disability. And I'm involved with 3 disabilities. 4 disabilities: the hearing disability, the visual disability, and also cleft lip and palate disability, and also club feet disability. So my connections through my medical sort of degrees, etc., is that have been able over the last 30 years to get people who are like-minded to go and travel and change people's lives by making sure, particularly girls, because if they are left with these disabilities of not being able to hear, not being able to see, not being able to walk, or have cleft lip and palate, whereby they can't talk, they don't join in society, they can't go to school, they're deaf. So if you can fix these, then these children do not then go and beg on the streets. Because if they beg on the streets, they will get trafficked, they'll get sexually abused, etc., etc. So emphasis on girls, I think, over the last 25, 30 years that I've been doing, is really my mission, if we can get there. But coming back to Malawi, I look at Malawi as a payback. I was born in that country. That country made me what I am. So I put a lot of effort into Malawi, into education, into toilets, into sanitary pads. We've just recently, 2 weeks ago, had a big storm in the south of Malawi. Yeah. So, what funds we have got with my charity, we were almost the first people to actually get some immediate help with food and toiletries, etc.
It's remarkable. It's a remarkable journey because your life is a living testimony to, one, the power of giving, but also the power of education. As you rightly said, you've got over 8 degrees behind you at a time where you've realized, without me being super dependent on other people's morality of looking beyond skin, I have to maybe put the odds in my favor by being overtly qualified. But then what you've done throughout your own life is that you built a mosque, you helped build one of the largest ones in Birmingham. You've supported countless lives without fear or favor, which is an important aspect of that you've done this without looking at people's religion or looking at their beliefs or faiths in between. And then what you're also doing is actually making the world a much better place later on. So I suppose that the linear part for me is you actually are a practicing human, which is unfortunately a rarity in a fraternity that is over 8 billion strong across the planet. What's your biggest fear that you have, Rashid? Because you've done everything that you can do. I know that one of the mayors wrote in your book that you've had several lifetimes within one, but that also means that you've had several more pains of understanding what really makes the world work than most people. What are those fears that you have in your head that goes beyond the climatic issues as well?
I think my fear, in one sense, is that around the world I think more and more people are becoming more and more greedy, just generally speaking, and that there is no concern for people who are in distress. My immediate example would be what happened in Afghanistan, for example, where people who actually helped us, they'll be left behind to be slaughtered. These sort of injustices to humans. I just cannot believe that humans can do that to other humans. It's that sort of culture we need to change. I honestly don't know how one can do it. You need icons, that there are, to me, people like Gandhi, for example, or Nelson Mandela. These are, Sister Teresa, Mother Teresa. These are sort of hugely iconic people to me that I would learn from. And it isn't there's hardly anybody at the moment in the world that I could actually look up to or particularly want to visit or shake hands with, except those people that I mentioned, because they just expound human natural feelings that they translate into action. And that's what worries me, that there aren't people that actually do that. And they should come from our leaders. And it doesn't matter which country it is. We've got very, very weak leaders. They might be strong in terms of armament or money, but
the mental and moral fortitude to make a difference is severely lacking.
And yet all these things were totally useless against COVID. Just one little virus, has knocked the whole world for its sakes. So yes, don't fight against nature. It can come to bite you, that's for sure.
Absolutely. Rashid, it's been a pleasure to have you on the show. We've covered a lot in your life. There's obviously a lot more that people can find out more. And I'm sure that this will be the first of many more discussions to come on. Is there any final thoughts that you'd like to leave with our growing global audiences out there?
I think the most important thing is that if we can help each other and respect each other and understand each other's needs and always strive to get more and more education and even think about why does a bird fly or why is sky blue. I think that sort of curiosity to learn is I think so important. Doesn't matter how old you are.
Yeah.
So that would be my final word.
What a incredible discussion, I'm sure you agree. Rashid is one of those individuals who really has put society in front of his own needs. It's a remarkable story of social custodianship, but also equally of resilience. We never got into some of the other issues that he's faced, but it all can be read within his book, Moments in Time. I'll make sure I'll put a link to it directly on our podcast list. Until next week, I hope all remains well, and I really hope you're enjoying these incredible journeys from right the way across the globe. Make sure you go to the website, www.globalindianseries.com. There you can actually see articles coming up every single day. Remarkable discussions affecting people's lives right the way across this planet. Until next week, I hope all remains well.
Global Indian Network. Print, TV, events, podcasts. Find out more at globalindianseries.com.